trying something new today, which is a live stream of reading. Most of my content that is book related, I have been able to pre-record and edit back in the first 2 months of the year, mostly January actually. But at the end of April, all of my pre-recorded content will have been uploaded, and I would like to continue posting content, but I no longer have access to a computer that I can use to edit the content the way I normally would. So I'm going to try reading on live stream instead. So bear with me as it's going to be unedited. This book I picked up actually at a book sale at my local library yesterday, and it's one of those collections of stories that are often used to help beginner readers, start reading. And it's part of the Celebrate Reading collection by Scott Forsman. And then it's called The World is Round, Just Like an Orange, Many Ways of Learning. It says that it was 50 cents, but I actually came on the last day, so I got a whole bag, grocery bag of books for $1. And you can see it used to be part of a school library collection, and then it got donated to the library book sale. And I have this set, and then I also have Do You Hear What I See and The Wolf Is at the Door, also picked up at the same book sale. I'd prefer to stream this horizontally, but I couldn't figure out how to get my phone to do that. So I'm going to have to just sort of move the pages across as we go. And since we're doing a live stream, I'll read this part for you as well, which is talking about the cover artist, the person who made the art on the front. Illustrator Mike McGurl lives near Santa Fe, New Mexico, in a house with a view of 3 mountain ranges. He says the beautiful landscape inspires him as he works on his drawings. And the book itself is copyright 1993, which means that's when it was published. And then it shows the sections that are in that the stories are in. So there's school stories, passion to know, I can do it, and then student resources with a glossary, literary terms, and more books to enjoy. Also take note of the progression of the picture. I probably will not be reading all of these today. My voice probably will last for about 30 minutes, and so I'll read as many as I'm able to do. The first story we have is called The Imperfect/Perfect Book Report by Johanna Hurwitz. There was no doubt about it. Zoe Mitchell was just as smart as Cricket Kaufman. Everyone who had known Cricket since she had been the star of the morning kindergarten class, back when she was 5 years old, agreed. Finally, she had met her match. In some ways, it made Cricket feel strange not to be the best student in the class, but at the same time, she worked harder than ever, and found that she liked school better and better. She was learning so many new things. It was hard to decide if it was because now she was in 4th grade or because she was working not to let Zoe get ahead of her. Lucas Cott was smart too, but it wasn't the same thing. Maybe it was because he was the smartest boy in the class and she had been the smartest girl. Now, whenever test papers were handed back, Cricket craned her head to see what mark Zoe had gotten. Almost always, the 2 girls had performed equally well. Mrs. Schrallenberg beamed proudly at them both when they each got a 100% on the fractions test in arithmetic. But she also congratulated Julio for improving his score. When Cricket walked to the back of the room to use the pencil sharpener, she was able to see that Julio had almost as many problems wrong as he had gotten right. Mrs. Schrollenberg was a funny teacher. She always said she was proud of all her students, and to prove it, she never singled one person out above the others. Maybe that was why it wasn't quite so bad that Zoe Mitchell was such a good student. If Cricket wasn't the teacher's pet this year, neither was Zoe. No one was. With a different personality of the day selected each morning, and students like Julio being congratulated even when they could only answer half the questions, everyone was treated equally. Still, when Mrs. Schrollenberg said that once a month everyone had to write a book report, Cricket was delighted. She loved reading, and a book report would be fun for her to write. She would do one that was so much better than everyone else's that Mrs. Schrollenberg would have to admit that she was the very best student in the class. Although Cricket was pleased with the new assignment, there were loud groans from the back of the room. "Quiet," Mrs. Schrollenberg scolded. "If you have something to say, raise your hands and I will call on you." She looked at Lucas, who had made the loudest groan. "Don't you like to read, Lucas?" asked the teacher. "Sure," said Lucas, "but I don't like writing book reports." "A book report is a way of sharing something that you have enjoyed with the rest of the class," said Mrs. Schrollenberg. "It should tell your classmates whether or not they too should read that book." Lucas did not look convinced. Cricket knew he read a lot of books. She saw him checking them out of the school library when the class had library time. But she also knew he was lazy about doing homework. She, on the other hand, couldn't wait to begin. She would make the best book report that anyone ever did. Then, perhaps finally, Mrs. Schrollenberg would know what a great student she was. Cricket had read so many books since the school year had begun that at first she couldn't make up her mind which to use for her report. Finally, she decided to write her report on the book that she had given to Zoe. It was Dear Mr. Henshaw by Beverly Cleary. It was too bad she couldn't find a copy of it in the library, but Cricket remembered the story very well, and she thought she could write a report from her memory. Her memory was very good, and it had been only a couple of weeks since she had read the book. Cricket sat down and wrote, covering both sides of a sheet of loose-leaf paper as she told all about the book. Then, very neatly, she copied it over. She used a razor-edged marking pen that she had bought with her allowance last week. The letters came out clear and neat, but near the bottom of the page she made a mistake. Cricket didn't want to have any crossing out on her report, so she took a fresh piece of paper and copied her report over again, very slowly this time so that she wouldn't make another error. When she was finished, it looked beautiful. It was the neatest piece of homework that she had ever done. Then, to enhance the report, she decided to make a special cover for it. She took 2 sheets of red-colored paper. With her pencil and a ruler, she drew lines across the top of the page. She did it very, very lightly, so that afterward she would be able to erase the lines. Then, using the block letters that they had been learning to do in art class, she wrote the title and the author. Dear Mr. Henshaw by Beverly Cleary, book report by Cricket Kaufman. Underneath, she drew a picture of a boy sitting at a desk and writing. People who hadn't read the book might think it was supposed to be a picture of Cricket writing her book report. But if you read the book, or at least read Cricket's report about it, you would know that it was supposed to be Leigh Botts, the main character in the story. He was always writing letters to his favorite author, who was named Mr. Henshaw. Cricket colored in the picture with her markers, and she erased the lines from the top of the paper. Cricket had her own stapler. She used it to staple the top cover and the back cover to the page with her report. When she was finally finished, it was time for bed. She had missed her favorite Thursday evening television program, but she was so proud of her completed book report that she didn't even mind. Wait until Mrs. Schrollenberg sees my wonderful report, she thought. She knew that the teacher would have to be very impressed with her careful work. The next morning, Cricket proudly handed in her report. "You didn't tell us we had to make covers," said Connie Alf when she saw Cricket's masterpiece. "We didn't have to make covers," said Julio. Cricket looked at the paper he was putting on the teacher's desk. Wait until Mrs. Strahlenberg saw that he had written a report about Mr. Popper's penguins, which she read to them at the beginning of September. It was cheating to write a book. It was cheating to write a report about a book that you hadn't even read. Listening didn't count. And besides, everyone in the class already knew about the story. Julio will be in big trouble, Cricket decided. "I wrote about the book that you gave me," Zoe whispered to Cricket as she put hers in the pile. "It was a great book, and it was fun to write about it." She smiled at Cricket, but Cricket did not smile back. It hadn't occurred to her that Zoe would use the same book that she did for her report. "How long was your report?" Cricket asked her. "It was all one side and a little bit of the other side of the paper," said Zoe. Cricket began to feel better. Her report was longer, and her report had a fancy cover. Her report had to be a lot better than Zoe's. In fact, having another report on the same book to compare with hers would make Mrs. Strahlenberg realize all the more how much effort Cricket had put into the assignment. She smiled at Zoe. It was a good thing that they had both written about the same book after all. Mrs. Strahlenberg took all the reports and put them inside her canvas tote bag. "I'll take these home to read over the weekend," she promised. "On Monday I'll give them back and we'll share them together." All weekend, Cricket glowed inside as she thought about her wonderful book report. She just knew that her teacher was going to love it. She couldn't wait until they were returned on Monday. Mrs. Strahlenberg would probably write on the report how fabulous it was. The reports were not returned to the students until after lunch on Monday. Cricket could hardly sit still as the teacher walked about the room handing them back. She decided that she would try and keep a straight face. It would be hard not to grin from ear to ear when she was reading the teacher's comments. But on the other hand, it would look as if she were showing off when other students, such as Julio, got bad marks on their reports. She held her breath as Mrs. Strahlenberg stood at her desk and sorted through the remaining papers in her hand. "Here's yours, Cricket," said the teacher. She patted Cricket on the back. "I'm sure you'll do better next time, so don't worry too much about your grade." Cricket couldn't imagine what the teacher was referring to. There was nothing written on the red cover of her report, but when she opened it up, she saw a B- written on the top of the page. Cricket couldn't believe it. How could she possibly have gotten such a low mark? This was an A+ report. It didn't make sense. Then Cricket noticed that on the inside of the back cover, Mrs. Strahlenberg had written a message. "It is careless of you to misspell the name of the author whom you are writing about. The author of this book spells her last name Cleary, Cleary. Also, the award that this book won is called the Newbery Award Medal, not Newberry. If you read your report over, you will see that you said the same thing 3 different times. It is better to say what you have to once and not bore your readers. I am glad you liked this book, and I am sure next time you will write a better report to prove it." Cricket's eyes blurred with tears. She couldn't believe it. Mrs. Strahlenberg didn't like her report? So what if she had spelled the author's name wrong? What did it matter? She had never said that spelling was going to count in their book reports. Chat, can you still not hear me? "I am going to have a few people read their reports out loud to share them with us now," said Mrs. Strahlenberg. "Let's start with Julio," she said. Cricket blinked back her tears. If she had gotten a B minus, Julio must have gotten a D. I gave Julio an A for his report, the teacher said as Julio walked proudly up to the front of the room. Even though Julio wrote about a book that we have already read and talked about in class this year, he has captured the humor of the story, and what he has to say about the book will make anyone who hasn't already read it want to read it, she said. Julio cleared his throat and waited until he had everyone's attention. Then he read his report. It was short, Cricket noted, but he made everyone laugh when he reminded them of one of the funny scenes in the book. Suppose you wrote about a book you didn't like, said Connie. Why would you bother to do that? Asked Mrs. Strahlenberg. If you didn't like the book, you should have stopped reading it and looked for another one. All the children looked at each other. They had never heard a teacher say that you should stop reading a book. Do you know how many books are in the school library? Mrs. Strahlenberg asked. 100, guessed Julio. Cricket raised her hand. She had once asked the librarian, so she knew the correct answer. Many, many more than 100, said Mrs. Strahlenberg. 200, someone called out. No speaking out, Mrs. Strahlenberg reminded the students. Cricket, do you know? Asked the teacher. 8,000, she said. There were loud gasps. 8,000 was a big number. That's right, said Mrs. Strahlenberg. And don't you think that if there are 8,000 books right here in this school building, you could find one that you would like? So why would you waste your time reading a book you don't like? But if we have to make book reports every month from now on, we'll need to find more than one book, Lucas pointed out. That's right, Connie agreed. I suspect that if you gave it a try, you could find many, many books that you will like among the 8,000 books in the school library. And what about the public library? Do you know how many books they have there? 8,000, someone guessed. Mrs. Strahlenberg shook her head. The next time you go, ask the children's librarian how many books are in the collection there, she said. And next time, Julio will write about a new book, one that he hasn't read or heard read to him before, Mrs. Strahlenberg added. Right, Julio? Julio grinned at the teacher. Right, he said. I want to see if I can make an A every time. That's the spirit, said Mrs. Strahlenberg. Next, she called on Zoe. Zoe went to the front of the room and began reading. Cricket was surprised to hear her name in the report. Zoe read, I picked this book because it was given to me by my friend Cricket Kaufman. At first I thought I wouldn't like it because it was all in letters, but before I knew it, I was right in the middle of the story of Leigh Botts and his problems. Cricket could hardly believe that Zoe considered her to be her friend. Just because she gave her that book, it didn't make them friends. That hadn't been her idea. Her mother had insisted that she bring a gift when she went to Zoe's party, and now Zoe had gotten an A writing about it when Cricket had only got a B minus. It just didn't seem fair. Zoe finished reading her report. How many people want to read that book now that they have heard about it? Asked Mrs. Strahlenberg. Every hand in the class except Cricket's went up. Now you know why Zoe got an A on her report. She has done an excellent job of sharing her pleasure with all of us. I noticed that Cricket didn't raise her hand, but she doesn't have to read the book. She already did, said the teacher, smiling at Cricket. And when she gave a copy of it to Zoe as a present, she was sharing her pleasure of the book in still another way. Cricket could have said that when she bought the book for Zoe, she hadn't even read it yet, but she didn't. She liked what Mrs. Strahlenberg had said about her sharing her pleasure of the book by giving it as a present. It almost made up for the bad mark she got. Mrs. Strahlenberg wrote Beverly Cleary's name on the chalkboard so that everyone could copy it and said, Now, when you go to the library, you'll know who the author is. Cricket blushed to see the correct spelling on the board. It had really been foolish on her part to write a book report when she didn't have the book right in front of her to copy the author's name. She wouldn't make that mistake again. A few other students read their book reports too. Cricket noticed that none of them had made covers for their reports. It had been silly of her to waste her time making a fancy cover if Mrs. Strahlenberg didn't give her extra credit for it. "There isn't time to read any more reports," said Mrs. Strahlenberg after a while. "This was just to get us started. Next month we will have oral book reports and everyone will have a turn. So start looking for a good book to read. Don't wait until the last minute." The bell rang for dismissal. Zoe edged over to Cricket. "Thanks again for the book," she said. Cricket nodded her head. She was relieved that Zoe didn't ask her what grade she had gotten on her report. If the situation had been reversed, and Cricket had received an A and Zoe had not read her report out loud, Cricket knew she would have been dying to ask. "I'll bet we have the same taste in books," said Zoe. "Maybe we could go to the library together after school sometime. You could show me the books you've read, and I could show you the ones I've read." Cricket found herself smiling at Zoe. It sounded as if it might be fun. There had never been another girl in school who liked to read as much as she did. Maybe Zoe was right. Maybe she would be a friend to her. "Okay," she agreed, and suddenly it didn't matter so much what grade she had gotten on her report. Next time she would get an A, and if Zoe got one too, it wouldn't be so terrible. After all, they were the two smartest girls in Mrs. Strahlenberg's class. Because this is a book that is kind of made to be used in school, it has a thinking about it section, so I will read out the questions, and if you feel so inclined, you can comment your answers, or you can just think about them. Question number 1. You are in Mrs. Strahlenberg's class with Cricket, Zoe, and the others. How do you like being there, and why? Question number 2. The author gives her readers some clues that Cricket may not do as well on her book report as she thinks she will. What are some of those clues? Question number 3. Cricket and Zoe are assigned to do a joint project for the science fair. How will they like working together? Will there be any problems? Describe their experience. Another book by Johanna Hurwitz. Shy Aldo Sosi is having a terrible time making friends at his new school. His attempts are not made any easier by the disaster that gives him his nickname. Find out how Aldo copes in Aldo Applesauce. So, let me know how this live went. If you feel like you would like to see more of them, I think I'll do a different live stream for this next story, and come back if you'd like to hear that. Not sure exactly when I'll do all the live streams. Probably not as often as I would do pre-recorded videos because my time is much more caught up with other things than it had been when I was doing the pre-recorded videos. But thank you to everyone who hung out with me while I was reading today, and thank you to everyone who watches this video once I post it. And I hope you all have a good day.